She wheels into the throne room and dares to touch the Alpha King's scar. His dead bond mark detonates blue. The wolves go silent, and the priests hiss, "Witch." He should order her execution. Instead, his beast bows. If one crippled maid can break the curse with a fingertip, what happens when she reaches his heart? If a single touch can unmake a curse, imagine what love could destroy. Tell me in the comments, would you fear her or follow her? And don't forget to subscribe, because this story is only just beginning. Caelion Dragor, the Alpha King whose wrath silenced armies, ruled a kingdom built on obedience and fear. His heart, fractured by a betrayal that nearly tore his wolf apart, had long turned to stone, until the night they brought her to him. Arindra Vale, the palace's lowest maid, had been crippled since birth, a girl hidden behind marble walls and cruel whispers. Yet when she defied an order meant to humble her, Caelion saw something he hadn't seen in years. A soul unafraid of him. Her calm voice met his fury like moonlight meeting flame. Her weakness disarmed him. Her strength enraged him. And when her touch reached his scarred hand, the mark of his lineage, the bond mark of an alpha, flared for the first time since his curse. He'd trapped her in his world of command and cruelty. But in the end, it would be her gentleness, not her strength, that would unmake the beast and heal the man he'd buried. The northern palace woke beneath a veil of frost and whispering wind. The halls of obsidian and bone, once echoing with orders and the clash of armored feet, now carried something else entirely. A strange quiet, a tension too soft to name. Servants glanced over their shoulders when Lyra passed, their hands tightening on trays, their whispers cutting short, as though afraid she might hear the things they feared to speak aloud. The crippled one, the king's pity, the omen girl. Her limp made no sound, yet her presence filled the corridors like an unseen tide. The silver threads in her hair caught the torchlight with every movement, not bright enough to dazzle, but enough to haunt. The Alpha King watched her from the balcony above the great hall, hands clasped behind his back, eyes colder than the frost veining the windows. Caelion Dragor, war-forged, unbroken, the beast in man's skin, had seen thousands kneel before him. None had looked at him as she did, without fear, without flattery, without trying to see the king in him at all. He had told himself she was a curiosity, a fragile distraction in a fortress made of iron. But that night in the throne room, when her trembling fingers had brushed his hand and the mark on his chest had burned for the first time in years, something in him had cracked. He had not slept since. Lyra's quarters were small, a chamber carved into the east wing, where moonlight poured through the stone lattice like a silver net. She woke before dawn each day, dragging her small frame across the cold floor, scrubbing the marble, tending the temple lamps, carrying pitchers she could barely lift. When she thought no one was watching, she sang, not words but soft hums that echoed through the arches, notes so pure the guards at their posts sometimes forgot to breathe. Cael heard them too. From his chamber, 2 floors above, he would pause mid-command, the parchment curling in his hands as that sound reached him. It wasn't melody, it was memory, something that clawed open a wound he had long buried beneath power. He told himself it was nothing. He told himself it was weakness, but he found reasons, every night, to walk past her corridor. That evening, the palace torches flickered out one by one, leaving the corridors half-lit by moonlight. Lyra moved quietly through the temple of the wolf, a small bowl of oil balanced on her lap. Her leg trembled from the climb, but she didn't falter. The moon statue loomed before her, a carved relic of an older age, its eyes hollowed, its flame long dead. She knelt, whispering words no priest had taught her, words she'd remembered in dreams since the night her mother died. Moon above, take what strength I have left. Heal the heart that does not know how to beat. When she tipped the oil into the lamp and touched the rim with her fingers, the flame shuddered, then burst to life in a breath of silver. The temple filled with light. From the shadows at the doorway, Kyle froze. He hadn't meant to come. He'd been restless, pacing his chambers, drawn by something he refused to name. But now, watching her in the white glow, he could feel it, the wolf within him bowing low, muscles tightening, breath shortening. His instinct screamed to kneel. It was unthinkable. Alphas did not bow to mortals, especially not to maids who walked with limps and prayed to forgotten gods. Yet there it was, a deep primal surrender rising inside him, as if some unseen law older than blood had been written for this moment alone. Lyra's fingers trembled over the relit flame. Her eyes lifted to the statue, not seeing him, not hearing his breath. She whispered, "Thank you," as though speaking to someone she missed. Kyle stepped back before the light could touch him. His chest ached where the bond mark lay, a low, pulsing thrum beneath his ribs. He pressed a hand against it, but the rhythm wasn't his heartbeat, it was hers. By morning, frost covered the palace gardens, glittering like powdered stars. Kyle didn't appear at court. His generals whispered, priests speculated, but no one dared ask questions. In his private chamber, he sat before the mirror, shirt discarded, staring at the mark that had reawakened. It glowed faintly blue, not the golden fire of Alpha Command, but something softer, fluid, alive. He remembered her voice, her prayer, her touch. He slammed a fist against the desk, splintering the wood. No. But the mirror rippled. The reflection blinked. Not his golden eyes staring back, but pale blue, luminous, steady. For the first time since his curse, the beast within him was silent. Down in the kitchens, Lyra worked through the morning, unaware of the ripples she'd caused. Pots clanged. Servants hissed insults under their breath, but she ignored them all. Her mind was still at the temple, the warmth that had filled her chest when the flame returned. That night, when she finished her duties, she slipped outside the servants' wing to breathe the cold air. The northern sky stretched endless above her, thick with stars. She closed her eyes, whispering to the moon again, "Please, let me stay unseen. If he remembers me, he'll destroy me." But he already had. Kyle stood at his window, watching her below, a tiny figure against the vast courtyard, moonlight brushing her hair. He didn't know why he couldn't look away. Her limp should have stirred pity. Instead, it stirred something dangerously close to reverence. He'd seen beauty in 1,000 faces. None of them had ever made him forget. Something cracked deep within. Not anger, not lust, but the shivering weight of recognition. The bond mark on his chest flickered, matching the faint glow that now shimmered over her skin. He didn't understand it. He only felt it. The wolf inside him, that ancient savage part, lowered its head in silence. That night, Kyle dreamed for the first time in years. He dreamed of a field of frost under silver skies. A woman knelt by a broken statue, her hand bleeding where she touched it. When she turned to him, her eyes were not pleading, they were forgiving. He woke gasping. The mark on his chest was glowing, the same soft blue as moonlight on water. For a heartbeat, he thought he heard another breath within the chamber, hers, faint and steady, echoing through his ribs like a lullaby. He pressed a trembling hand to his heart, whispering, "What are you, little flame?" Far below, in the east wing, Lyra stirred in her sleep, her lips parted. Kalian. The flame in her lamp flared blue. Answering the call, neither of them yet understood. As the Alpha King finally drifted into uneasy sleep, the mark upon his chest pulsed once more. Not with the rhythm of power, but with the heartbeat of the crippled maid who had reignited his soul. Dawn scraped its pale knife across the mountains. Inside the northern palace, the day arrived as it always did. Bells, boots, breath pluming in the cold. But beneath the routine, something new paced the corridors like a rumor with teeth. Kalion did not attend morning council. Instead, he sent for the maid. The summons was delivered to Lyra in the scullery, where she was rinsing soot from a brass lamp made soft by her hands. The page boy who bore the message could not stop staring at her leg, at the way she braced and moved, at the gentleness of her fingers despite the heat of the water. When he finally spoke, it was too loud. By order of the Alpha King, you will present yourself in the solar, immediately. A hush fell over the kitchen. Ladles paused mid-air. A cook snorted, derision forked with fear. What you do, little limpwing, charm a wolf? Lyra set the lamp aside. She dried her hands slowly, each motion a prayer that her pulse would steady. I polished a flame, she murmured, but no one heard her over the clatter and hiss. She followed the boy through a warren of stone passages, up a narrow stair that overlooked the inner court. The winter light was thin. The banners hung heavy, weighed down by frost. The palace had always felt like a cage. Today it felt like a throat, tight, trying to swallow. At the door to the solar, the guards traded glances. When they let her pass, she realized they were avoiding her eyes. The king stood with his back to the window, a black figure carved against the snow. Maps and open reports littered the table, raids on the southern ranges, unrest along the river, a priest's complaint about the temple flame relit without sanction. Caelion did not look at any of it. His gaze found her, then drifted, deliberately, to the scar on his palm, now pale where her touch had been. You are Lyra of the East Wing, he said. It was not a question. She dipped a bow, careful not to let the motion unbalance her. Yes, Your Majesty. He did not step toward her. Kneel. Her leg folded. The old ache licked along her thigh, warning, memory, refusal, but she let the stone take her weight. It wasn't fear that shook her. It was the nearness of him. The air shifted around Cael like weather, like a storm deciding if a valley would live. Closer, he said. She obeyed. The room tightened. He watched her cross the last feet on one knee, a slow crawl that should have humiliated but somehow did not. He could not stand that. He had broken men for less. Yet, when she reached the braided rug by his boots, the growl coiled beneath his ribs loosened, as if some invisible hand had unknotted it. Look at me. She did. The blue in her eyes was not the blue of ice. It was river light, sky before a storm, temple flame caught in a bowl. His wolf, wild, ancient, cruel, lowered its head so suddenly that Cael had to brace a palm against the table to hide the tremor in his fingers. The rage that had been his breath since boyhood thinned like mist. What did you do to the temple lamp? He asked. His voice came out quieter than he intended. I asked it to burn, she said simply. His mouth curved in something that was not a smile. And the moon listened? She did not answer. He felt rather than saw the way her attention slid, not toward fear, but toward listening. He could almost hear what she heard, the soft thud of his heart echoing off stone, the scuff of a guard's boot outside the door, the whisper of frost sloughing from the window lattice. Stand, he said abruptly. She rose, slow as a tide. When she reached her feet, she swayed, only once, and his hand shot out on instinct. Her fingers brushed his wrist. Heat surged up his arm, across his chest, to that mark that had slept for years. It flared. Not gold, not the brutal burn of command, but a steady blue, as if the sea had learned to live beneath his skin. His breath evened without his permission. He snatched his hand back as if burned, furious at himself for needing what he did not understand. Leave, he said. No, wait. The word surprised them both. Stay within call. She bowed again, the movement fluid despite pain. Yes, my king. As the door closed behind her, Caelion swore softly into the empty room. He flexed his fingers. They no longer trembled. By midday, the palace had found the rumor it wanted. The cursed Alpha had not broken the Maid. The Maid had steadied the Alpha. It ran through the kitchens first, between copper kettles and baskets of root vegetables, then slipped upstairs to the laundries and the armory, where squires whispered over oiled leather. He called for her twice. Twice, and he did not rage. By the time it reached the smaller chapel, the words had grown teeth. She bewitched him at the lamp, a priest hissed. Moon magic. It will unseat the throne. Another shook his head, eyes narrow. Or else it will heal what the gods themselves refuse to touch. Neither saw the old temple flame, bright again for the first time in a decade, burn steady as a held breath. Kyle tested coincidence until it became proof. At the afternoon briefing, when the southern envoy attempted a slight, mocking the north's thin harvests, Kyle felt the old heat rise in him, that savage urge to silence insult with blood. He lifted his eyes to the far wall. Lyra had been sent to replace the inkstand. She moved like a quiet note through clamour, set the jar near his elbow, and inclined her head. Her hand, small, scarred, brushed the table. The rage slid back like a tide receding over stones. The envoy's voice blurred into something unimportant. Kyle finished the negotiation without breaking the man's bones. When the council dispersed, Malric Thorne lingered. The advisor's hair was the grey of a blade's edge. His smile held the same light. "A useful discovery," he said, too mild. "A tame charm for a wild temper." Kyle's gaze sharpened. "Choose your words." "As you wish." Malric's eyes flicked to the door through which the maid had gone. "Charm, then, but charms draw interest. Priests, nobles, enemies. If this effect is real, others will try to claim it, or kill it." Kale's knuckles whitened against the table, not from anger, but from the knowledge that Malric was right. "Let them try," he said. "Some already will," Malric murmured, and left the warning behind like a needle in cloth. That evening, Kael called for Lyra, under the pretense of chores so often that by the fifth summons, the young steward dared to glance sideways at his king. "She has already turned the lamps, Your Majesty. Twice." "Then she can turn them a third time," Kael said, and the steward fled rather than reveal the grin he could not smother. Lyra came with a fresh wick folded like a pale tongue between her fingers. She did not ask why he needed light in a room already lit like noon. She only touched the first lamp with the new wick, then the second, and when she lifted her hand to the third, the skin at her wrist brushed his sleeve. His pulse steadied as if her body had adjusted the dial of a clock. He tested it again, an order, another, a brush of air, and each time he approached the cliff's edge, where rage lived, the ground firmed beneath his feet. He hated that he wanted the relief. He hated that the wanting felt like breath after drowning. "You are quiet," he said as she trimmed a flame to a clean blue tongue. "I was told my voice offends," she answered, and then, when his expression did not change, she added, "Because it sounds like prayer." "Does it?" "You tell me, sire. You are the one who listens." He should not have liked that. He did. The corner of his mouth almost remembered how to lift. "Who taught you to light lamps?" he asked. "No one," she said. "I only ask them." She looked at the flame, not at him. "Some lights want to return. They're only afraid." The word struck him with a force he hadn't braced for. Before he could hide the stumble, Lyra's hand, unthinking, reached for his. He caught her wrist. Light leapt between them, brief, bright, a vein of silver through stone. The old scar across his knuckles, the one he'd earned the night his father died, warmed under her touch. The pain he'd learned to ignore went very still. Lyra jerked back, eyes wide, as if she'd overstepped into sacrilege. "Forgive me." "For what?" His voice was rough. "For touching what hurts," she whispered. He swallowed. "It hurts less now." They stood in the soft ring of a relit lamp, neither moving. Somewhere beyond the walls, a wolf howled once and went silent, as if unsure of its right to break the night. "Go," he said at last, because if she didn't, he might have asked her to stay. "Rest." She bowed. The cords in his neck tightened when her limp caught on the braided rug. He reached out before he could think and steadied her elbow. Her breath hitched in surprise. The place where his fingers pressed seemed to bloom with a warmth that had nothing to do with flame. "Thank you," she said, and the words were so plain they felt like water. He let go. Sleep did not come for Lyra, so much as the world slid away, gentled by exhaustion and the slow-burning peace of touch. When the dream took her, it did not ask permission. It seized. She stood in a corridor she had never walked, taller ceilings, thicker air, the stones stained with soot. Alarm bells were ringing. The sound rattled her bones. Men shouted. A child cried from somewhere too far away to reach. Lyra's limp was gone. She ran. She turned a corner and slammed straight into flame. It roared down hangings and crawled across the floor, as if the floor had been waiting to be devoured. Through the smoke, she glimpsed a door kicked off its hinges, a bed draped in white, a woman half-sitting against pillows that had already begun to spark. Her hair was dark as raven's wings. Blood matted it to her skull. A boy knelt beside the bed, no more than 12, stark with terror. He pressed a cloth against the woman's side, his hands slick with red. "Hold on," he begged in a voice Lyra knew, though she had never heard it break. "Mother, hold on." The woman, Queen, some part of Lyra understood, turned her head with terrible effort. She lifted a trembling hand, smearing blood across the boy's cheek like a blessing. "Kalian," she breathed, and in the boy's face, Lyra saw the man the world would fear. The same eyes, the same stubborn line of mouth, the same tiger's crouch around pain. "Promise me," the Queen whispered, a cough stealing the air from her chest. "Promise you'll be gentle where your father was not." The boy nodded, choking. "I promise. Promise you'll love and let it change you." His throat clicked. "I promise." The door exploded inward. Men in the old king's colours shoved into the room. "Get the boy out," someone shouted. "Protect the air." The boy refused to move. He curled over his mother, as if his small body could be shield and sword. The Queen found a last scrap of breath and used it like a blade. "Kalian," she said, softer than ash. "Live kinder." Her hand fell. The dream burned white. Lyra screamed. In his chamber, Kale was already half awake when the cry tore the night. He bolted upright, a hand flying to his chest. The mark blazed under his palm, blue gone searing white, as if some old oath had just been dragged into light. "Lyra," he said, and the name was not a command this time. It was the answer his body had already given. He was on his feet before the echo of her scream had faded, bare to the waist, breath fogging in the cold. He did not call guards. He did not call Malric. He just ran, down the stair, across the dark corridor, past the relit temple lamp that flared brighter as he went, as if the palace itself had offered a torch to his path. He reached her door at the same instant she flung it open from the other side. They stared at one another, both panting, both wild-eyed. Lyra's cheeks were wet. Kale's hand still pressed his burning mark, as if holding a wound closed. "What did you see?" he demanded. She swallowed, voice raw. "Your mother." Silence. The Palace of Wolves, used to howls and orders, had never heard anything so soft carry so much ruin. "What did she say?" His voice was smaller than she had ever heard it. Lyra lifted her chin, though the memory shook her. "She asked you to live kinder." The mark under his hand flamed once, bright enough to light the hall, then settled to a fierce, aching blue. For a long breath they did not move. They only listened to the other's heart. Across the threshold of her small door, the curse and its cure stood facing each other, his palm hot over the burning mark, her chest heaving as if her ribs had been a bell rung by memory. Somewhere far above, the moon slid from cloud, and the light that fell between them looked very much like a bridge. The torches along the corridor hissed as if the air itself feared to breathe. Kalian stood motionless in front of Lyra's chamber, her words echoing through his ribs like a struck bell. "She asked you to live kinder. It should have been impossible." That memory, his mother's last breath, was locked behind the curse that bound his wolf. No mortal should have seen it, much less spoken it aloud. Yet Lyra's eyes had carried the same light as that burning room, and when she said the words, the mark on his chest had flared as if it remembered too. Now silence lay between them, heavy as the snow outside. "Go back to sleep," he said finally, voice frayed around the edges. Lyra shook her head. "You won't." Her defiance was quiet, but it slipped under his skin. The king who commanded armies could not command this fragile thing in front of him. His wolf stirred, a restless shift, not of anger, but of recognition. "You see things that are not yours to see," he growled. She lifted her chin. "I didn't ask to. It's your heart that shows them." The air shuddered. Kyle's control fractured. He turned away before she could see the tremor in his hand. "Enough." But her next word stopped him cold. "You were a boy in that fire." He froze. "I saw your mother's eyes." Lyra's voice shook. She wasn't afraid of dying. She was afraid that you'd become your father. Kale spun on her, fury rising to mask the terror in his chest. "You will speak of her again and—" The rest died in his throat, because as he spoke, she reached towards him, instinct, not challenge, and her fingers brushed the scar that ran from his palm to his wrist. Light exploded, not blinding, not burning, just pure, like moonlight breaking water. The old wound beneath her touch healed before either of them could move. The skin that had been twisted and pale smoothed, warm and whole. Kyle stumbled back, staring at his hand as if it belonged to someone else. The mark on his chest pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. His wolf went silent. "What did you do?" he whispered. Lyra's eyes were wide with fear and wonder. "I don't know. It happens when I feel your pain." Pain. The word struck deeper than magic. He crossed the room in 2 strides and caught her wrist again, searching her face. "This is your doing, your trick." Her pulse trembled beneath his fingers. "Would a trick heal you?" He looked down at his unscarred hand. No priest, no healer, no bloodline power had ever touched the curse before, yet this frail girl had undone it with one breath. "I should be furious," he said. "Then be." Her voice didn't shake. It was steady as moonlight. "I should call the priests," he said again, softer this time. "But you won't." He looked up sharply, but she was right. His body refused to move. The longer he stared at her, the quieter his pulse became, as if her calm could rewrite the storm that had been his nature since birth. She stepped back, breaking the contact, and the calm shattered instantly. Rage roared through him, wild and empty. "Leave," he rasped, because the alternative, kneeling, was unthinkable. Lyra bowed her head and obeyed. She limped past him toward the door, her shadow long in the blue light. Before she crossed the threshold, she said quietly, "You weren't cursed to destroy, Kalion. You were cursed to forget how to heal." The door shut. He stood alone, the scent of her still clinging to the air, his pulse thundering beneath the glow of a mark that no longer obeyed him. The priests came at dawn. They'd seen the flare from their towers, the unnatural light that broke the palace darkness like day. Their robes hissed as they knelt before the throne, eyes wary. "My king," said the eldest, a man whose voice was older than the wars it had blessed, "what we witnessed last night, was that your doing?" Kale's answer was a blade wrapped in calm. "You think I would light the sky for sport?" The priest hesitated. Then it was her. Every eye turned toward the door of the hall where Lyra stood waiting, summoned by fear she could not name. "She is an omen," another priest whispered, "a false flame." Kale rose slowly. "She is my servant. Then she carries your curse." He smiled, a flash of teeth without warmth. "Perhaps she carries my cure." The priests fell silent. Even the wolves that prowled the steps outside whined low, uncertain. Kyle's power rolled through the chamber, but it felt different now. Not wrath, not dominance. Something older, something alive. He looked toward Lyra. "Come." Her limp echoed in the stillness as she crossed the marble floor. He could feel the council's stares, their revulsion, their fear. But when she reached him, the mark beneath his skin steadied again. The priest at his right dared to speak. "Majesty, her presence alters the sacred balance. You endanger the realm." Kale's gaze cut through him. The realm endangers itself when it confuses cruelty for order. The words hung like thunder. He turned to Lyra, lowering his voice so only she could hear. Do you fear them? No, she said. Only for you. That admission undid him more than defiance ever could. Later, when the council dispersed in sullen silence, Cale led her through the north corridors toward the private wing, a place no servant had ever been permitted. This is not safety, he said, opening the door to a moonlit chamber overlooking the frozen courtyard. It's protection from ignorance. For now. Lyra hesitated. You'll be punished for this. I already am, he said, and she caught the faintest ghost of a smile. Inside, the walls gleamed with silver banners, the crest of the Dragor bloodline glinting like snowfire. He turned to her. You'll stay here until I decide otherwise. No one enters without my command. She nodded, though her eyes searched his face. You're afraid? He laughed once, a sound that cracked more than it mocked. Only fools claim they're not. Then you're not cursed either. He stared at her for a long moment, then said quietly, You have no idea what I am. Her gaze didn't flinch. Maybe not, but I know what you aren't. He looked away before she could see the storm in his eyes. Outside, the moon was a white wound in the sky. Its light fell across them both, soft and strange, catching on the faint mark that glimmered beneath her collarbone, the mirror of his own. Kyle felt the bond hum like a second heartbeat, one he could neither command nor kill. Rest, he said, turning toward the door. You'll need your strength. For what? For surviving me. That night, Kyle lay awake, the palace silent around him. He could hear the snow sliding off the roof, the wolves pacing the outer walls. Beneath it all, he could hear something else, soft, rhythmic, echoing faintly through the corridors, like the sound of another heart beating near his. He didn't need to guess whose. He closed his eyes, fighting the tremor in his breath. Moon, damn you, he whispered. What have you done? But there was no answer, only the pulse of a bond that glowed blue in the dark, alive, defiant, and unbreakable. As Kael drifted toward restless sleep, the mark on his chest burned once more, not in pain, but in resonance. In the chamber beyond the wall, Lyra's breath synced with his own. The palace exhaled, as if it too remembered how to live. The morning sun never reached the northern throne room. Even at midday, it was a cathedral of cold stone and half-shadows, a hall built to remind men that power was never warmth. Yet that day, the air was hotter than fire. Caelion Dragor sat on the obsidian throne, his jaw tight, knuckles white against the wolf-engraved armrest. Before him, the High Council knelt in a half-moon of defiance dressed as devotion. Their crimson robes fanned across the floor like spilled blood. The first to speak was Malric Thorn, the king's most trusted advisor, and his oldest shadow. Majesty, Malric began, voice smooth as oiled steel. It grieves us to bring this matter before you, but the temple reports are unanimous. The crippled servant you harbor, she has defiled divine order. Kael's gaze lifted slowly. Defiled? She lit a dead flame with her hand, said another priest, eyes gleaming. No mortal may awake in moonfire. The last who tried was burned into ash. And yet, Kael murmured, she lives. That, my king, is the problem. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Kael rose. The wolf mark at his chest flickered faintly through his tunic. Her name, he said, is Lyra. You will not speak it with venom while I breathe. Malric inclined his head, just enough to disguise a mockery as respect. Then forgive me, sire, but the law is older than your mercy. The blood moon rises in 7 nights. If she is what they whisper, a witch, a vessel of forbidden power, it will taint the ceremony. The curse may spread. Kael's eyes turned to ice. You think my curse is contagious, Malric? I think, Malric said softly. It found her. From the shadows near the marble pillars, Lyra stood silent, Her palms clenched so tightly her nails broke skin. She had been brought by guards under the guise of testimony, but it was a trial thinly veiled as counsel. The priest chanted half prayers, half accusations. She healed the king's mark. She walks with deformity, a sign of divine punishment. She defies hierarchy, an omen of rebellion. Lyra's breath trembled, but she didn't bow. Her gaze met Kael's, and in that locked moment, the world went quiet. He saw it then, not fear, not guilt, only sadness. The sadness of someone used to being misunderstood. Kael took one step down from the dais, and another, until the Alpha King stood before the accused, not as ruler, but as shield. "She healed me," he said to the council, his voice deep as thunder rolling over snow. "Not with sorcery. With grace." A priest spat near her feet. "Grace is not a power of cripples." The growl that tore from Kael's throat shook the walls. His wolf surged beneath his skin, eyes flashing molten gold. "Say that again," he said, stepping forward, "and I will show you how a cripple humbles kings." The priest stumbled back, trembling. Malric's voice sliced through the silence. "Your Majesty, please. The council's concern is not insult. It is safety. If her touch alters your blood, the Pax may rebel. You risk the throne." "The throne," Kael said coldly, "was never what I sought to keep." He turned to the assembly. Priests, nobles, generals, each one staring at him as though he'd declared war on the gods themselves. "Do you not see? The moon chose her, not me. Her flame awakened what your rituals could not." "She binds you," hissed a bishop. "A servant binding a king. Blasphemy." Kael's lips curled into something like a smile. "Then perhaps blasphemy is what this kingdom needs." Lyra's knees buckled, not from fear, from the pulse she felt rising between them. Her bond to him throbbed in her chest like a second heartbeat. The air shimmered with faint blue light. Kael turned, his voice softening. "Lyra." "Yes, my king?" "You said once that I was cursed to forget how to heal. Tell me, do you think it's possible to remember?" Lyra's throat tightened. "If you stop fighting the light that wants to stay." The council gasped. The words themselves were treason. To speak gently to a monarch in judgment was death, but Kael only breathed out a laugh, raw, broken, human. "Then so be it." He faced the assembly again. "This girl is under my protection. She will remain in my private wing. Any hand that touches her in hostility will answer to me." A ripple of disbelief swept through the hall. Malric's jaw stiffened. "You would defy the priesthood, the council, the gods." "I have already defied hell," Kael said quietly. "What's one more tyranny?" That night, the castle burned with whispers. They said the king had lost his reason, that a crippled maid had bewitched him, that the moon itself had bound them in sin. But for the first time in years, laughter returned to the northern corridors. Kael smiled without realizing it. His wolves no longer snarled at his scent. His hands no longer trembled with rage. And Lyra, though she moved quietly through the halls, carried warmth with her like a secret fire. Servants began to follow her lead without orders. Children in the courtyard bowed when she passed. Even the sick in the lower barracks claimed they felt better after hearing her voice. Power had changed. It no longer barked, it breathed. Days later, a meeting of nobles was called in the throne hall. Unplanned, unwelcomed, unstoppable. Lyra stood beside Kael's chair, the court glaring daggers. Malric stepped forward, flanked by robed clerics. He bowed, low, respectful, but his smile was venom. "The council warns again, Majesty. This path ends in ruin." Kael rose, one hand resting on the hilt of his blade, the other loosely at his side, near Lyra. "Perhaps ruin is where we begin again." "She weakens you," Malric pressed. "Look at you, no fury, no wrath. Wolves obey fear, not tenderness." Kael looked at Lyra. and the entire court saw it, the softness in the eyes of a man who had forgotten how to feel. "She is not my weakness," he said, his voice carrying through every corner of the hall. "She is the cure to what I've become." The chamber erupted, outrage, awe, disbelief. Lyra's eyes filled, her breath catching between shock and devotion. Malric's smile was cold. "Then, my king, you've just declared war on your own kingdom." Chaol's reply was quiet enough to freeze every tongue in the room. "Then may the kingdom learn mercy before I'm done." As the court dissolved into chaos and prayer, Lyra stood still beside him. The bond between them hummed, visible now, faint silver threads of light connecting their chests. Outside, wolves howled not in rebellion but in awe, their song echoing through the valley, a kingdom's heart learning to beat again. Frostvale Citadel lay far beyond the capital's reach, a fortress carved into the spine of the northern mountains, where wind howled like memory and the moonlight never died. It was where kings went to hide their ghosts. Caelion brought Lyra there under cover of night. No banners, no escort, only his wolf and his will. When the gates closed behind them, the last echo of the court faded into the wind. The kingdom might rage, the priests might plot, but here, in this place of exile, time itself seemed to kneel. Lyra had never seen snow fall like this, slow, endless, silent. The cold bit through her cloak, but it also cleared the ache in her chest. The sky shimmered pale blue over the frozen valley. Somewhere below, the wolves howled, not as beasts, but as sentinels. "This place," she whispered, "feels alive." "It is," Chaol replied. "It remembers every oath ever broken." She glanced up at him. The moonlight caught in his hair, turning black strands to silver. "And you bring me here, to break another?" He gave a half smile. "No, to keep one." They said no more that night, but as they passed through the citadel's great iron doors, the mark beneath Chaol's skin pulsed once, as though recognizing sacred ground. Days turned into a strange rhythm. Chaol hunted and trained at dawn, his control still sharp but fraying at the edges. Lyra tended to the inner halls, reviving long-dead torches with her hands, feeding the fire that seemed to hum at her presence. When she walked, Chaol could hear her limp echo through the halls, steady, defiant, human. It was the most comforting sound he'd ever known. He began to watch her in silence. The way her fingers brushed frost from the window ledges, the way she hummed under her breath when she worked, the way her hair caught stray light and scattered it like embers. And he began to forget what his own solitude had sounded like. One evening, he found her standing in the courtyard, hands cupped around a dying flame. The snow swirled around her like a crown of pale fire. "You'll freeze," he said, stepping out from the archway. She didn't turn. "Fire doesn't freeze. It just waits to be remembered." Chaol's chest tightened. "You speak in riddles." "No," she said, finally facing him. "You just listen like a soldier, not a soul." He almost smiled at that. "And what does your soul hear now?" Her gaze softened. "That yours wants to rest, but your rage won't let it." He stepped closer, the space between them filled with heat that had nothing to do with flame. "You presume much for a maid." "Then tell me I'm wrong." He didn't. That night, the wind rose and tore through the citadel. Lyra woke to the sound of Chaol's growl, echoing down the corridor. Not rage, but agony. She found him half kneeling before the mirror in his chamber, sweat glistening across his shoulders, the mark on his chest burning blue-white. "Don't come closer," he gasped. "It's the curse." But she didn't stop. She knelt beside him and placed her trembling hand over the mark. The glow flared, searing bright, then dimmed into a steady pulse. Chaol's breath slowed, his heartbeat steadied, the beast within him quieted like a storm that had remembered mercy. Lyra didn't move her hand. "You fight it every night?" "Every hour," he whispered, "since the day I was crowned." Her voice broke. "And no one helped you?" None could, until you. For a long time, neither spoke. The fire crackled softly beside them, and in that fragile silence, something shifted. His hand brushed her cheek, hesitantly, as if afraid the world would end for it. She leaned into it anyway. When their eyes met, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. "Lyra," he murmured, "you are light I cannot bear, and cannot lose." "Then don't fight it," she whispered. "Let it be what it is." He bent his forehead to hers. The bond between them pulsed once, twice, then burned gold. From that night on, everything changed. Kyle began to soften, his orders tempered, his presence warmer. The guards noticed first. He no longer punished hesitation. He listened. The servants dared to speak again, and Lyra, the crippled maid who had once flinched from every gaze, now moved through the citadel as if she belonged. Her limp was still there, but she no longer hid it. Kyle had taught her that scars were a kind of truth, and she, in turn, taught him that gentleness was not weakness. But the bond that joined them came with a cost. Every time she healed him, with a touch, a look, a word, his strength waned. His power was pouring into her, feeding the same light that once cursed him. By the seventh night, his reflection looked hollow-eyed and pale. His wolf could no longer rise at command. His aura flickered between flame and shadow. Malric's warning echoed like prophecy. "She weakens you." But Kale didn't care. He found peace in her presence, even if it was killing him. One evening, as the storm roared outside, Lyra found him seated by the fire, his cloak discarded, his breath shallow. "Kalian." He lifted his head. The silver light in his eyes was fading. "You should rest," she said softly. "So should the moon," he murmured, "but it keeps watch anyway." Lyra knelt beside him. "This is because of me." He smiled faintly. "This is because of love." Her eyes brimmed. "If breaking the bond could save you, I would—" "Then don't," he cut in, voice hoarse. "If loving you means losing my power, then let the world fall." She shook her head, tears slipping down her face. "No kingdom is worth your life." "No kingdom is worth not living," he said, his hand brushing her cheek again. "You taught me that." The fire between them flared once, a soft blue halo, then settled into gold. In its glow, the Alpha King and the crippled maid sat together, not as ruler and servant, not as curse and cure, but as two souls who had stopped running from pain. Outside, the storm bowed to silence. The mark on Kael's chest dimmed to a quiet glow as his head fell against her shoulder. Lyra held him, tears glistening in her lashes. The citadel slept under snow, and for a single night, peace belonged to them. Fragile, forbidden, eternal. Frostvale Citadel lay far beyond the capital's reach, a fortress carved into the spine of the northern mountains, where wind howled like memory and the moonlight never died. It was where kings went to hide their ghosts. Kelion brought Lyra there under cover of night. No banners, no escort, only his wolf and his will. When the gates closed behind them, the last echo of the court faded into the wind. The kingdom might rage, the priests might plot, but here, in this place of exile, time itself seemed to kneel. Lyra had never seen snow fall like this. Slow, endless, silent. The cold bit through her cloak, but it also cleared the ache in her chest. The sky shimmered pale blue over the frozen valley. Somewhere below, the wolves howled, not as beasts, but as sentinels. "This place," she whispered, "feels alive." "It is," Kael replied. "It remembers every oath ever broken." She glanced up at him, the moonlight caught in his hair, turning black strands to silver. "And you bring me here, to break another?" He gave a half smile. "No, to keep one." They said no more that night, but as they passed through the citadel's great iron doors, the mark beneath Kael's skin pulsed once, as though recognizing sacred ground. Days turned into a strange rhythm. Kael hunted and trained at dawn, his control still sharp but fraying at the edges. Lyra tended to the inner halls, reviving long-dead torches with her hands, feeding the fire that seemed to hum at her presence. When she walked, Kael could hear her limp echo through the halls, steady, defiant, human. It was the most comforting sound he'd ever known. He began to watch her in silence, the way her fingers brushed frost from the window ledges, the way she hummed under her breath when she worked, the way her hair caught stray light and scattered it like embers. And he began to forget what his own solitude had sounded like. One evening, he found her standing in the courtyard, hands cupped around a dying flame. The snow swirled around her like a crown of pale fire. "You'll freeze," he said, stepping out from the archway. She didn't turn. Fire doesn't freeze. It just waits to be remembered. Kael's chest tightened. "You speak in riddles." "No," she said, finally facing him. "You just listen like a soldier, not a soul." He almost smiled at that. "And what does your soul hear now?" Her gaze softened. "That yours wants to rest, but your rage won't let it." He stepped closer, the space between them filled with heat that had nothing to do with flame. "You presume much for a maid." "Then tell me I'm wrong." He didn't. That night, the wind rose and tore through the citadel. Lyra woke to the sound of Kael's growl, echoing down the corridor. Not rage, but agony. She found him half kneeling before the mirror in his chamber, sweat glistening across his shoulders, the mark on his chest burning blue-white. Don't come closer," he gasped. "It's the curse." But she didn't stop. She knelt beside him and placed her trembling hand over the mark. The glow flared, searing bright, then dimmed into a steady pulse. Kael's breath slowed. His heartbeat steadied. The beast within him quieted like a storm that had remembered mercy. Lyra didn't move her hand. "You fight it every night?" "Every hour," he whispered. "Since the day I was crowned." Her voice broke. "And no one helped you?" "None could, until you." For a long time, neither spoke. The fire crackled softly beside them, and in that fragile silence something shifted. His hand brushed her cheek, hesitantly, as if afraid the world would end for it. She leaned into it anyway. When their eyes met, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. "Lyra," he murmured, "you are light I cannot bear, and cannot lose." "Then don't fight it," she whispered. "Let it be what it is." He bent his forehead to hers. The bond between them pulsed once, twice, then burned gold. From that night on, everything changed. Kael began to soften. His orders tempered, his presence warmer. The guards noticed first. He no longer punished hesitation. He listened. The servants dared to speak again. And Lyra, the crippled maid who had once flinched from every gaze, now moved through the citadel as if she belonged. Her limp was still there, but she no longer hid it. Kael had taught her that scars were a kind of truth, and she in turn taught him that gentleness was not weakness, but the bond that joined them came with a cost. Every time she healed him, with a touch, a look, a word, his strength waned. His power was pouring into her, feeding the same light that once cursed him. By the seventh night, his reflection looked hollow-eyed and pale. His wolf could no longer rise at command. His aura flickered between flame and shadow. Malric's warning echoed like prophecy. "She weakens you." But Kael didn't care. He found peace in her presence, even if it was killing him. One evening, as the storm roared outside, Lyra found him seated by the fire, his cloak discarded, his breath shallow. "Kaelian." He lifted his head. The silver light in his eyes was fading. "You should rest," she said softly. "So should the moon," he murmured, "but it keeps watch anyway." Lyra knelt beside him. "This is because of me." He smiled faintly. "This is because of love." Her eyes brimmed. "If breaking the bond could save you, I would—" "Then don't," he cut in, voice hoarse. "If loving you means losing my power, then let the world fall." She shook her head, tears slipping down her face. "No kingdom is worth your life." No kingdom is worth not living, he said, his hand brushing her cheek again. You taught me that. The fire between them flared once, a soft blue halo, then settled into gold. In its glow, the Alpha King and the crippled maid sat together, not as ruler and servant, not as curse and cure, but as two souls who had stopped running from pain. Outside, the storm bowed to silence. The mark on Chaol's chest dimmed to a quiet glow as his head fell against her shoulder. Lyra held him, tears glistening in her lashes. The citadel slept under snow, and for a single night, peace belonged to them. Fragile, forbidden, eternal, and the dawn that followed was bloodless and still, a silence so deep it felt wrong. Lyra woke alone. The space beside her on the fur-lined couch was cold, the mark on her chest faintly throbbing, as if reaching for a pulse that was gone. She rose, her limp heavier than usual, and made her way through the citadel's stone corridors. The wolves that normally prowled outside the gates were nowhere to be heard. The air was too quiet. When she reached the grand hall, she froze. Chaol stood there, unarmed, bare-chested, staring at the open doors. The mountain wind howled through them, carrying a metallic scent she knew too well. Blood. "Chaol," she whispered. He didn't look back. His voice was low, almost reverent. "They've come." At the base of the citadel, banners of the High Council fluttered like dark wing. Hundreds of armored men filled the snowfield. The Shadow Guard, elite hunters bred to obey the Council's word above the King's command. And at their head stood Malric Thorne, face calm, hands clasped behind his back, as though this were merely another court session. "Majesty," Malric called upward, his voice carried by a spell of amplification. "You have abandoned your throne, defied the council, and consorted with witchcraft. I come not as traitor, but as servant to restore the rightful order." Chaol's eyes burned gold. "You mean to say you've come to destroy what you don't understand?" Malric smiled thinly. "Then we are both creatures of habit." The first horn blew. Steel met snow. Wolves burst from the gates. Chaol's last loyal sentinels, slamming into the Shadow Guard in a storm of fur and fury. Lyra pressed her palm to the nearest torch, lighting it with her strange moonfire. The flame flared blue-white, spreading along the walls, as if the fortress itself were awakening to defend its king. But for every wolf that rose, 10 soldiers followed. For every prayer whispered, another blade sang. The war had begun. Chaol's roar split the mountain. His wolf surged forth in full glory. Not the mindless beast the curse once made him, but something older, primal, divine. Every blow he struck sent soldiers scattering. But he was bleeding. The bond strain had left him weakened, his heart beat in erratic, painful bursts. "Chaol!" Lyra shouted from the stairway, her voice cutting through the chaos. He turned toward her, just in time to see Malric raise his hand. A streak of silver light shot across the courtyard. It struck Lyra square in the chest. She crumpled. "No!" Chaol's roar was a quake. He tore through soldiers like a storm breaking bone, and faith alike, until he reached her side. Lyra's fingers twitched. Her breath was shallow, her tunic stained with moonfire and blood. Malric approached, calm, smug, holding the staff that had cast the spell. "Do you see, my king? The witch bleeds, just like the rest of us." Chaol's eyes were molten fire. "You've sealed your death." Malric raised a brow. "On the contrary, I've freed you." He gestured, and a dark rune ignited in the snow, the old binding spell of the Alpha Throne. Chaol's body locked mid-motion. The mark on his chest flared violently, his wolf howling within him. "Your curse, Majesty," Malric said softly, "was meant to bind your rage. You chose love instead. The curse will now take what it's owed." Chaol dropped to one knee, gasping as pain ripped through his veins like molten lead. His eyes flickered from gold to silver to black. Lyra reached toward him, her voice barely a whisper. Kalian, stop fighting it. Let me... He shook his head violently. You'll die if you try. Then so will you, she said, voice trembling but fierce. Malrique stepped closer, savouring the sight. You wanted control, my king. She took it from you. Watch her die, and you'll rule again. Something broke in Kyle then. Not bone, not spell. Something deeper. The mark on his chest blazed into gold flame. The rune shattered. Kyle lunged forward, his wolf half emerged, claws tearing through steel and flesh alike. He seized Malric by the throat, lifting him from the ground. You call love a weakness, Kyle growled. Then let it be my weapon. With one motion, he drove Malric's own staff through his chest. Light burst from the wound, swallowing the courtyard in radiance. When it cleared, the advisor's body was gone. Only ash and whisper remained. But Kyle was barely standing. His breath came ragged, his pulse flickering beneath his skin. The mark burned brighter with each beat. Lyra crawled toward him, her strength fading. Kyle, please, stop. He fell to his knees beside her. His hand found hers, rough, shaking, desperate. I told you, he murmured, voice raw. I'd be a king who dies for you. She shook her head weakly, tears spilling down her face. You're not meant to die. He smiled faintly, brushing his thumb along her trembling lips. Neither were you. The wind howled through the ruins of Frostvale. The last of the soldiers fell silent. The wolves gathered in a wide circle, bowing their heads, and in that circle, the Alpha King and the crippled Maid knelt beneath the blood-red sky, bound by light, by loss, by a love that refused to surrender. As the moon rose crimson over the battlefield, Kyle's power cracked open like glass. A storm of gold and blue tore through the citadel, lighting the mountains for miles. Lyra's cry vanished in the blaze, and when the light died, all that remained was snow and silence. The moon bled over Frostvale. It wasn't red, it was alive, pulsing like a heart in the sky, spilling its crimson glow across the shattered courtyard where Lyra knelt bound to the moon altar. Her wrists bled where the moon iron bit into them, her breath coming shallow, but her eyes, those silver-bright eyes, never broke from the horizon. The high priest chanted from the temple steps, their voices trembling in rhythm with the storm of power circling above. Each word was a curse, a blade meant to sever her from the world. By the law of the wolves and the vow of the crown, the high priest cried, the crippled witch who defied the curse shall burn beneath the blood moon. Lyra closed her eyes. She could taste iron on her tongue, could feel the mark on her chest flare with Kyle's heartbeat, weak but alive. He was out there, and she whispered to herself, not a prayer, but a promise. You were never cursed to love, you were cursed to forget how. The gates of Frostvale exploded inward. The air turned white with snow and ash, and from that storm stepped Caelion Draven, barefoot, bleeding, half wolf, half man, his chest a wound of living flame. His cloak was gone. His crown shattered somewhere on the road behind him. His golden eyes had dulled to molten silver, glowing like stars about to die. The soldiers turned their blades toward him. The king is dead, one whispered. Kyle's snarl was answer enough. He moved through them like a storm given flesh, every strike of his claws tearing through armor, every heartbeat echoing in Lyra's pulse. When his body faltered, she gasped. When she screamed, his strength surged. The bond between them pulsed like a drumbeat of the moon itself, and when the high priest raised his staff again, Kyle looked up at him with eyes no longer human. You dare speak for the gods? The priest stammered. You are possessed. I am free. He reached the altar in 3 strides. The last of the Shadow Guard lunged between them, men Kyle had once commanded, faces twisted by fear and fanaticism. He didn't kill them. He broke their weapons, disarmed their rage, and pushed through. The moonfire that bound Lyra began to climb her arms, creeping toward her throat. Kael, she cried, her voice breaking. You can't stop it. I can't, he said, his voice quiet but unshakable. But we can. He tore the chains apart with his bare hands, skin melting, bones fracturing, but he didn't stop. The iron split with a scream, and Lyra collapsed forward into his arms, her palms glowing blue with light so pure it hurt to see. The priests began their final incantation. The blood moon screamed. Kale pressed her trembling hand to his chest. "Then end it," he whispered. Tears streamed down her face. "I'll lose you." He smiled, soft and broken. "You'll find me again, every time the light touches the snow." The air cracked, the ground shook. Lyra's power erupted outward, silver light bursting through every shadow, pouring through Kael's mark, until both their bodies blazed with color, gold from him, blue from her. The two flames merged into white. The world stilled, then shattered. Every curse in the kingdom broke that night. Every bound wolf howled at once. Every star blinked awake in the heavens. The moon altar burned in silver fire, swallowing the priests, the rebellion, the shadow court, everything that had chained the realm for generations. When the light finally died, snow fell again, gentle, slow, as if the world exhaled, and in the center of it all, Lyra knelt beside Kael's body, her hand still glowing faintly. His head rested against her shoulder, his eyes closed, his chest still. "Kaelian," she whispered, brushing a lock of hair from his face. "You're free now." No answer, only silence and the steady flicker of dying moonlight. She pressed her forehead to his, tears streaking her cheeks. "You were never cursed to love," she murmured again, her voice trembling. "You just forgot how." The last of her strength faded. The mark on her chest glowed one final time, and then dimmed, leaving only a faint silver scar, shaped like a crescent moon. Lyra closed her eyes. The wolves in the valley began to sing, a morning song that rose like wind and carried through the mountains. But the story didn't end there. When the dawn came, the blood moon was gone. The sky was white, pure and endless. The snow reflected the first rays of morning light, spilling through the ruins in gold. And Kaelian Draven drew a breath. It was faint, shallow, but real. His chest rose. The mark over his heart, once dark and burned, began to glow with silver fire. The curse was gone. The king lived. The moon turned white once more, its light soft and forgiving. The wolves bowed in a wide circle around the fallen altar. Lyra's body rested beside him, peaceful in the glow of dawn. Kael reached for her hand, fingers trembling, and the moment their skin touched, their scars shimmered as one. Love had broken what power never could. The first light of dawn spilled over Frostvale's peaks, painting the snow in gold and silver. The battlefield was silent now. No steel, no chants, only the hush of wind carrying the scent of ash and pine. In the heart of the ruins, Kaelian Draven stirred. His breath fogged the air. His chest rose, slow but steady. When he opened his eyes, the gold that once cursed them was gone, replaced by soft silver, like moonlight reflecting on calm water. He turned his head. Beside him, Lyra lay motionless, her face serene beneath the pale morning glow. Her hands, once trembling, were still clasped around his. Their joined scars shimmered faintly, not as wounds, but as light. "Lyra," his voice cracked. He sat up, pain shooting through his ribs, but he didn't care. He gathered her into his arms, brushing the snow from her hair. "You did it. You freed us." For a long moment, there was no answer. Then, barely audible, came a whisper. "You were never meant to rule through fear." Kael froze, her lips curved into a faint smile. "I told you," she murmured, eyes fluttering open. "You were cursed to forget how to love." He laughed, a broken, disbelieving sound. "And you reminded me." She lifted her hand weakly to his face. "No, Kael, you chose to remember." By midday, word spread through the mountains. The curse was gone. The blood moon had faded. The wolves that once prowled in madness now roamed free. The snow melted in silver streaks where moonfire had fallen, revealing green beneath for the first time in generations. Kael stood before the ruined citadel with Lyra at his side. The remaining priests knelt before them, their chants turned to prayers of atonement. He looked down at her, at the girl they had once called broken, crippled, unworthy. Now she stood tall, her limp still there, but no longer shameful. Every step she took was steady, radiant, whole. When the crowd bowed, Kael took her hand and raised it high. "This," he said, his voice carrying across the valley, "is the woman who healed a kingdom, the Luna who taught the wolves mercy, my heart, my equal, my crown." The people cheered, the wolves howled, and the kingdom, once bound by chains of fear, exhaled its first breath of peace. Weeks later, a new temple rose on the ruins of the moon altar, not carved from stone alone, but from remembrance. Its walls bore no statues of kings or gods, only an inscription that shimmered in molten silver across its archway. The king whose heart could not be healed was saved by the hand that trembled. Kael and Lyra walked the halls together. The scent of pine and honey filled the air, candles glowing like stars. Everywhere they went, people bowed, not from fear, but gratitude. In the grand hall, Kael paused before a large mirror of moonsteel, one that had belonged to his ancestors. He studied the reflection, the scar over his heart, the softness in his eyes. Lyra joined him, her reflection beside his glowing faintly from the mark on her chest. "Do you miss it?" she asked quietly. "The power?" He shook his head. "Power was never the curse. Pride was." She smiled. "Then you've already won." That night, under a silver moon, Kael stood with Lyra atop the citadel balcony. The wind was gentle, carrying the laughter of wolves below as they chased through the thawing snow. He turned to her, voice low. "Do you remember the first night you came here?" Lyra laughed softly. "I thought you'd have me killed." "I nearly did," he admitted, "because I thought your quiet would break me." "It did," she said, smiling, "but only so you could rebuild." He brushed his fingers along her cheek. "You healed more than my heart, Lyra. You healed the soul of every wolf who ever forgot how to feel." She leaned into his touch. "And you taught me that even broken things can lead kingdoms." He kissed her then, not as a king, not as an alpha, but as a man who had finally learned peace. The moon above flickered, casting a soft ring of light around them, and for the first time in history, the northern wind carried warmth instead of cold. They called her crippled, they called him cursed, but when they walked together, the world bowed. Not to their power, but to their love.